The chandeliers sparkled above the vast ballroom of the Harrington estate, their crystal prisms scattering light across marble floors that had been polished until they gleamed like still water. Towers of balloons in shades of pink lavender and ivory bobbed near the vaulted ceilings. Streamers hung like delicate ribbons of frozen rain, and on the mahogany banquet table rested a birthday cake so elaborate it could have graced the cover of a luxury magazine. It was shaped like a fairy tale castle, its turrets frosted with sugar pearls, tiny windows painted with edible gold. Everything had been planned to perfection except for one unfixable flaw. The chairs around the table remained empty. Richard Harrington stood near the French doors, his tall frame stiff in a charcoal suit tailored to perfection. But his eyes betrayed the fatigue and helplessness no fabric could conceal. He had spent weeks preparing this day, pouring money into every detail, determined to make it magical for his only child. Yet, as the afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, every passing minute deepened the silence. There should have been the sound of laughter of children rushing around the ballroom, of squeals and running footsteps. Instead, there was nothing but the faint hum of the central air system and the restless creak of balloon strings tugging against the ceiling. From her custom wheelchair by the window, Sophia Harrington watched the circular driveway outside with an anxious hope that grew more fragile with every tick of the clock. Her blonde curls caught in the golden light, framing a face both delicate and too old for its 8 years. She turned toward her father, her voice trembling with innocence that cut sharper than any blade. "Daddy, when are my friends coming?" The question pierced Richard. He forced a smile, tightening the knot of his silk tie, as if holding his composure together by sheer will. "They'll be here soon, sweetheart. Maybe they're just running late," but the truth pressed heavy against his chest. He knew why the 24 invitations he had sent, 24 gilded cards, hand-delivered to her classmates, had all returned with polite but hollow excuses. "We'll be out of town. Johnny has soccer practice. We're so sorry, maybe next time." Since the car accident 2 years ago, the one that had stolen his wife, Catherine, and left Sophia unable to walk, people had grown distant. Their pity had curdled into discomfort. Her wheelchair, her fragile body, made other parents awkward, and their children even more so. Invitations stopped arriving. Playdates faded away. For Sophia, childhood had become a shadow of what it once was. Richard had tried to shield her from the truth, but today, her birthday made the cruelty undeniable. He turned back to the cake. Its candles waited unlit, mocking him with their perfect symmetry. Even the clown he had hired sat slouched in the kitchen, scrolling his phone, his painted grin sagging under boredom and embarrassment. Mrs. Walker, the longtime housekeeper, who now doubled as Sophia's caregiver, hovered nearby. She kept fussing with the untouched party favors, her face set in the tight expression of someone who wanted to help, but could not change the inevitable. She moved toward Richard, lowering her voice. "Mr. Harrington, perhaps we should..." A sound cut her off. A faint, hesitant knock echoed from the grand double doors at the front of the house. Richard's heart leapt. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe one child had come after all. Maybe one parent had dared to defy the silent consensus of exclusion. Straightening his shoulders, he forced himself into the role he knew so well, that of the billionaire host, composed and gracious. He strode across the marble foyer and pulled open the massive door. But the sight that greeted him was not what he expected. On the white stone steps stood a boy no older than Sophia, his small figure framed against the sun. His dark hair was neatly combed but overdue for a cut. A faded Superman t-shirt stretched across his chest, worn thin at the collar-patch jeans, covering legs too thin for his age. His sneakers were scuffed, the laces frayed. He looked entirely out of place against the grandeur of the Harrington mansion, like a sketch of innocence drawn onto a canvas of wealth. The boy's brown eyes, however, shone with unshakable brightness. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely, his voice carrying the lilting trace of a Hispanic accent. "I heard there's a birthday party here. I live in the apartments down the hill." He pointed toward the distant low-rise buildings, just visible through the manicured trees beyond the estate gates. "I don't have an invitation, but..." "Could I come to the party? I promise I'll be really good." Richard blinked, stunned. Of all the wealthy families they had invited, not one had come. And now, here was a boy in hand-me-down clothes asking for the honor no one else wanted. "What's your name, son?" Richard asked, his voice cautious. "Daniel, sir." "Daniel Morales. I'm 8 too." The boy smiled, revealing a small gap where his front tooth had been lost. He craned his neck, peering past Richard. "Is the birthday girl here?" Before Richard could answer, a shrill cry of delight rang from behind him. "Daddy." "Is that my friend Sophia?" had wheeled herself forward, her eyes lit up with a joy he hadn't seen in years. The transformation was instant. Her face, so often shadowed by resignation, now beamed with pure excitement. Richard swallowed hard, caught between disbelief and something like awe. He stepped aside. "Come in, Daniel." The boy entered cautiously, his sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. His gaze darted around the mansion at the grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the gilt-framed portraits. But he did not linger on any of it. His attention snapped to Sophia. "Hi," he said simply. "I like your balloons, and your cake looks amazing." Sophia grinned. "I'm Sophia. Do you like Superman?" "Because I love Superman." Daniel tugged at his shirt, embarrassed, yet proud. "This is my best one. My grandma says Superman helps people who need it, so I thought it was right for a birthday party." The room, once heavy with silence, shifted. Where emptiness had reigned, there was now the sound of laughter, thin at first, then growing stronger, as Sophia and Daniel began to chatter. Richard stood back, watching the scene unfold with an incredulity that bordered on reverence. His daughter, who had been abandoned by her peers, was radiant. She didn't notice the chair beneath her, and Daniel didn't see it either. To him, she wasn't broken or pitiful. She was simply a girl who loved superheroes, same as him. For the first time in years, the Harrington mansion echoed with something Richard thought he'd lost forever, his daughter's unguarded joy. The spell broke in the sweetest way. Without fanfare, without speeches, just two kids deciding that a birthday could begin with a hello. "Do you want to sit closer to the cake?" Sophia asked. "It has a drawbridge." Daniel's eyes went wide. "A real one?" "As real as frosting can be," she said, giggling. Mrs. Walker appeared like a gentle stagehand and wheeled Sophia to the head of the table, while Daniel hovered, unsure of where a guest without an invitation ought to stand. Richard pulled out a chair for him. The boy perched on the edge, hands clasped back straight like he'd been taught to respect rooms like this. "Would you do the honors, birthday girl?" Richard asked. Sophia nodded, and he lit the candles, 8 small stars trembling in the chandelier light. They sang, just the 3 of them plus Mrs. Walker humming, and a clown in the doorway, holding his hat to his chest like a man watching a miracle he didn't want to disturb. When Sophia took a deep breath and blew, the flames vanished in a clean sweep, as if the room itself had decided to turn a page. "Make a wish," Daniel whispered. "I already did," she said, eyes shining. "And it knocked." They laughed, and Richard cut generous slices, sliding one onto fine bone china and placing it carefully in front of Daniel. The boy stared at the plate like it might shatter under a wrong move. "You can pick it up," Richard said, amused. "It's just cake." Daniel took the fork, then paused. "Thank you, sir." He tasted the first bite and closed his eyes the way people do when they let joy register all the way. "My grandma bakes sweet bread sometimes," he said, swallowing carefully. "But I've never had castle cake." "What's your grandma's name?" Sophia asked. "Isabel," he said, the word soft with affection. "She says birthdays don't need big parties if you have a song and someone to sing it with you." "I like her already," Sophia said. The clown, emboldened, tiptoed closer and fashioned a quick balloon crown, then bowed at Sophia's wheelchair. "For Her Majesty," he announced in a theatrical whisper. Sophia giggled. "I dub thee Court Balloon Maker." "High honor," the clown said, winking at Daniel as he twisted a long balloon into a lopsided lightning bolt. "And for Sir Daniel." "For Sir Daniel, a thunderbolt of courage." He handed it over and disappeared as quietly as he'd come, content to have restored a party to the room that had looked like it might never earn the name. They didn't play the planned games. They invented better ones. Daniel asked permission to stand behind the wheelchair. "Only if you're the pilot," he told Sophia. "You tell me where we're going." "Everywhere," she said solemnly. But first, the castle. He navigated with surprising care, hands light on the grips, listening to her directions as she steered the expedition left, at the window. Right past the grandfather clock, that's the dragon. She declared a careful sweep around the table so close the turrets on the cake became mountains they nearly grazed. They spoke in a language kids remember and adults forget of capes and chariots of maps that exist only because you believe in them. From the doorway, Richard watched the choreography unfold Daniel's instinct to ask before moving. Sophia's posture straightening as command replaced apology. He could almost see the weight lifting off her shoulders as she gave instructions, and he followed not out of pity, but out of play. The room warmed. Something in Richard warmed with it. "Do you like school?" Sophia asked as they paused at the French doors. Sometimes Daniel admitted, "I like reading best. My grandma says books make your world bigger even if you can't go very far." Sophia glanced at the garden beyond the glass. "We have a ramp," she said. "Do you want to see the fountain?" Daniel looked toward Richard, questioning. "Go," Richard said. "I'll come with you." They crossed the threshold together, the billionaire, his daughter, and the uninvited boy onto the limestone terrace, where late afternoon sun poured across trimmed hedges. A small fountain threw coins of light into the air. Beyond the back fence, past manicured trees and the long slope of the hill, the low buildings of the apartment complex sat in the distance, like two worlds staring at each other, across a line no one bothered to draw. "That's where I live," Daniel said, pointing. "Maple Row Apartments." "Is it far?" Sophia asked. "Down the hill," he said. "Not far if you don't mind walking." He said it without bitterness. It was just geography. They circled the fountain at Sophia's command and slowly, then faster, then with a sudden halt because the Queen had spotted a sparrow who needed a friendly audience. Daniel crouched beside the wheelchair, quieter now, and told a story about how sparrows are really messengers carrying good news between houses. He didn't say it like a fairy tale. He said it like a truth that had kept him company when days got long. Back inside, Richard excused himself to the kitchen to pour lemonade. Mrs. Walker joined him at the counter. "He's a careful child," she said softly, "and she's not looking at her chair. Not for the last 20 minutes. I noticed," Richard said, barely trusting his voice. He watched the boy through the doorway. "He said he lives with his grandmother, Mrs. Walker nodded. "He's got manners. And he's not dazzled by this place." Richard thought of the parents who texted regrets and the cars that hadn't driven up the circular drive. The old ache rose and settled again, softer this time. "He sees her," he said. "Not the chair. Not the house. Her." The afternoon unspooled into the kind of simple rhythm Richard had tried and failed to buy with planners and party vendors. They took a picture with the castle cake. Daniel held up his thunderbolt and made a face so serious it made Sophia laugh until she had to wipe her eyes. He tried a party favor whistle and looked mortified at the honk, which only set off another round of giggles. When they opened the little bags of trinkets meant for absent guests, he chose one small plastic ring and put it on his pinky. "For your Majesty's royal decree," he said, presenting it with his best court bow. "You keep it," Sophia told him. "Kings need rings too." He shook his head. "I like to keep one thing small," he said, motioning to the ring. "So I remember big days are made of small things." Twilight crept toward the windows, blue edging the gold. Daniel checked a cheap watch with a cracked band. "I should go," he said, reluctant. "My grandma worries if I'm late." "Do you have to—" The question came out too quickly. Sophia's hands tightened on the armrests. "Do you think— could you come back?" Daniel looked at Richard, unsure of what he was allowed to promise. "Daniel," Richard said, "you're welcome here. Anytime." Really, the boy's eyes lit. "I could come read with her. Or play maps, I'd like that," Sophia said, trying and failing to sound casual. "Do you have a phone?" Richard asked. Daniel shook his head. "But Grandma does sometimes. Mostly we write notes." He hesitated, then dug into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper folded into precise quarters. "Our address. Apartment 2B. If you want to send a note." Richard took it like something fragile. "I'll send a note," he said, "but I might bring it in person." Daniel turned to Sophia. "I didn't bring a present." he blurted, suddenly shy. I didn't know there was a party until I saw the balloons through the window. You brought the present, she said simply. You. He ducked his head and bit his lip. And for a second, Richard saw the courage it had taken for a child in a patchwork clothes to climb stone steps and knock on a door that looked like it belonged to another planet. Wait, Sophia said, wheeling to the table. She grabbed a blank place card from the stack of unused ones and a marker. Tongue caught between her teeth, she drew 2 stick figures, one with a crown and one holding a lightning bolt, both under a cluster of balloons. She wrote, "Thank you for coming, Daniel," in careful, deliberate letters and handed it to him. "I'll keep it forever," he said, voice low with something more than politeness. Mrs. Walker wrapped a slice of cake and tucked it into a small box. "Take this to your grandma," she said. "Tell her happy birthday to the girl who finally got her party." Daniel smiled. "She'll sing to you next time we come," he promised. "She sings in Spanish and English. It makes the room feel bigger." At the door, he paused, looking back at the chandeliered room that now felt less like a museum and more like a house. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," he said, sticking out his hand with formal earnestness. Richard shook it. "Thank you, Daniel." They watched from the window as he jogged down the long drive, the balloon thunderbolt bouncing at his side, the cake box cradled like treasure. Near the gate he turned once and waved just a small flash of arm against the falling light, then disappeared down the hill toward Maple Row Apartments. Silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy kind. It was the hush that follows a good song. Sophia rolled closer to her father. "Daddy, yes, sweetheart." "Can he really come back as often as he wants?" Richard said. He bent and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the faint scent of frosting and shampoo. "And we might visit him too." "To bring the note, to bring more than a note," he said. When he looked past the terrace toward the distant rooftops that had always felt irrelevant, something in his chest rearranged itself like furniture, moved to make room for light. The mansion hadn't shrunk, but another place had grown larger in his mind. A second-floor apartment where a boy with careful hands and a grandmother with 2 languages might be sitting at a small table sharing a slice of castle cake, and the news that a lonely party had become a birthday after all. Richard folded the slip of paper 2B Maple Row and slid it into his wallet behind his black card where his most important numbers lived. Then he turned back to Sophia, whose crown had begun to tilt. "Your Majesty," he said, straightening it, "shall we plan another adventure?" Sophia smiled, tired in the contented way children get when the day has finally gone right. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed, but his mind was already on tonight, and a decision that would carry him down the hill and to a door that once you knocked might open a world he hadn't known he was missing. The following Saturday, Richard drove down the hill toward Maple Row Apartments. For years he had looked at that cluster of low buildings from his balcony, the way one looks at distant scenery, acknowledged but never considered. Today the sight tugged at him with a strange urgency. The contrast struck him immediately. His mansion sat above the neighborhood like a crown on a hill wrapped in gates and manicured gardens. Maple Row was modest, its paint weathered by seasoned stairwells patched in places, playground swings squeaking in the breeze. And yet, there was no decay. Flower pots bloomed on balconies. Children's chalk drawings decorated the sidewalks. Someone had painted the benches bright blue and yellow. A place that should have whispered struggle instead radiated care. He parked his black sedan, uncomfortably aware of how out of place it looked, and carried a bakery box with the cake Sophia had insisted on sending. A handwritten card in her careful scrawl wrote on top, "Thank you for being my friend." Apartment 2B smelled of warm bread and cinnamon. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman with silver-streaked hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. She wore a faded floral dress and stood with the kind of posture that speaks of dignity, not wealth. "You must be Mr. Harrington," she said, her accent lilting, but her English clear. "I am Isabel Morales. My grandson has talked of nothing else but your daughter all week." Richard extended the box. From Sophia. She wanted Daniel to have another piece of the castle cake. Isabel's eyes softened. "Then it will be our treasure tonight. Please come in." Inside the apartment was small but spotless. Every surface shone with the care of hands that had chosen pride over despair. Photographs crowded the walls, family gatherings, church events, a young boy with medals from school. The air carried the mingled aroma of spices and freshly baked bolillos cooling on the counter. Grandma Daniel appeared from the kitchen, his eyes lighting up. "Mr. Harrington, did Sophia come?" "She has therapy this afternoon," Richard said, pulling out his phone. "But she sent me with something for you." He tapped the screen, and Sophia's recorded voice filled the living room. "Hi, Daniel. I drew us flying in my wheelchair, remember? You said it was like a magic chariot. I miss you already." She held up the crayon picture to the camera, two stick figures soaring under a rainbow, one crown-topped one holding a lightning bolt. Daniel clutched the phone like treasure, watching the clip 3 times in a row. She remembered, he whispered, eyes shining. She really remembered. Isabel placed coffee and warm cookies on the table. "Sit, Mr. Harrington. You are welcome in our home." They spoke quietly as Daniel darted in and out, bringing his treasures: a smooth river stone, a thank you card from an elderly neighbor, a pressed leaf tucked in wax paper. "These are my best things," he explained shyly. "Happy memories don't cost money." Richard studied the boy, then the apartment. The humility of it all cut deeper than any boardroom debate. Here, in a space smaller than his master bedroom, he saw more warmth than he'd managed to keep alive in his mansion. "You have raised a remarkable grandson, Mrs. Morales," Richard said. The woman's gaze was steady. "Not remarkable, only taught to see others. Everyone is fighting battles you cannot see. If you remember that kindness becomes easy." Her words stayed with him, echoing in the silence that followed. But as the weeks passed, Richard's admiration became something sharper because Isabel began to weaken. One afternoon, when he came to fetch Daniel for a visit, he found her slumped in a chair, her hand pressed against her chest. "Grandma gets tired more?" Daniel whispered, eyes wide. "The doctor says her heart is sick." At the hospital, the truth became unavoidable. Isabel needed a specific medication, Cardiovex, one of the flagship drugs produced by Harrington Biopharma. The irony nearly knocked Richard off his feet. He had spent years overseeing its development, approving its price point, listening to financial analysts describe it as a premium treatment for those who can afford it. Now the price stared back at him like a curse more than Daniel's family earned in 6 months. He sat outside Isabel's hospital room, fists clenched, heart pounding. The reality was unbearable. And the woman who had reminded him of human dignity might not survive, not because the medicine didn't exist, but because it had been priced beyond her reach by his own company. Daniel appeared in the waiting room, clutching a crumpled prescription slip. "They said this one could help," he whispered. "But Papa says it costs too much." What if Grandma goes to heaven, like Sophia's mom?" The boy's voice cracked on the last word, and Richard felt his chest cave inward. It was no longer a question of corporate policy. It was no longer about profit margins. It was about a child who had given his daughter back her smile, about a grandmother who had shown him that warmth doesn't require wealth. Something shifted in Richard that day, a tectonic break in the way he had measured success. He had the power to save Isabel, and more than that, he had the responsibility. As the monitors beeped softly behind the door, Richard Harrington knew he was standing at the edge of a decision that would change not just one life, but the direction of his empire. The cardiologist's words were clinical, but they landed like verdicts. Isabel's condition was serious. Cardiovex offered the best chance. Insurance would cover some, not nearly enough. The rest, the doctor said with a practiced gentleness, would be challenging. Richard stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the quiet rise and fall of Isabel's chest, at the prayer beads wound around her fingers. Daniel sat on the windowsill, small and upright, like a guard who refused to abandon his post. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for anything. He just watched his grandmother and rubbed the edge of a worn wristband between his thumb and forefinger as if polishing hope. "What would it cost out of pocket?" Richard asked. The doctor named a number. In another life, it would have been a line item buried in a spreadsheet, a figure he might have approved with a pen stroke and a detached nod. In this room, it sounded obscene. "Start the treatment," Richard said. "I'll handle the rest, Mr. Harrington. Hospital policy." "I'm not asking," he said, softer than a threat, firmer then a request. I'm telling you to begin. Bill my office if you need a place to send an invoice. Outside in the hallway, he called his chief of staff. Lena, I want an immediate authorization to comp the CardioVex protocol for Isabel Morales at St. Bridget's and draft a temporary program. Don't argue an emergency assistance line for any patient flagged by partner hospitals who can't afford CardioVex. We'll sort the details after we save lives. There was a beat of silence. Understood, Lena said. I'll loop legal and patient access. He hung up and looked through the glass at Daniel, who had moved to hold his grandmother's hand. The boy glanced up. Richard lifted a hand in a small salute that meant, I'm here. I won't leave you in this. By morning, the medicine dripped into a line that carried it into Isabel's veins. Her color improved almost imperceptibly at first, then in ways even a layman could see. When she opened her eyes and smiled a thin but unmistakable curve, Daniel breathed out a sound that was part laugh, part prayer. Gracias, Isabel whispered. You didn't have to yes, Richard said. I did. He should have felt only relief. Instead, a second sensation rose behind it. Cold and familiar, the pressure of consequences. By the time he reached his office, the smoke was already in the air. A calendar blockade of urgent meetings snapped onto his schedule without invitation. Finance wanted numbers. Legal wanted guardrails. Communications wanted a statement. And the board wanted him. He stepped into the glass-walled conference room at Harrington Biopharma and found the table already ringed with faces that had helped build his empire and now looked capable of tearing it apart. At the head sat Evelyn Crane, board chair, immaculate in a suit that could cut a man without showing blood. To her right, Gavin Mercer, CFO, pale-eyed and precise. Along the far side lounged Harold Whitford, a hedge fund lion, with the lazy smile of someone who enjoyed other people's emergencies. Crane steepled her fingers. Richard, we hear you've launched a philanthropic experiment. I authorized treatment for a single patient, he said, and asked Lena to draft a temporary pathway for hospitals to alert us when a patient can't afford CardioVex. I intend to formalize that pathway. Without board approval, Mercer said. He slid a folder forward. The price elasticity on CardioVex is the backbone of this quarter. The margin funds our oncology pipeline. Then maybe we should stop balancing pipelines on people who can't breathe, Richard said. Crane's smile thinned. Let's dispense with the poetry. You cannot unilaterally reprice the product via charity. We have fiduciary duties. Our mission statement says we exist to improve lives, Richard replied. If our duty has drifted so far that the sentence means nothing, then the sentence is wrong, or we are. Whitford tapped his pen board. Mission statements are for plaques. Earnings are for adults. Richard let that sit. He looked down the table at people he had recruited and cultivated, at colleagues who once argued science with fire in their eyes. We can afford decency, he said. We just don't measure it. Create a foundation, Harrington Access. Fund it by trimming executive bonuses this cycle, slashing the brand campaign for the product everyone already knows, and sunsetting the private jet lease. That covers year one. Scale by matching corporate dollars to philanthropic partnerships. We'll publish a transparent framework and outcomes data. We do the right thing and show it works. Mercer's expression didn't change. You're suggesting we cut incentives, reduce awareness spend, and reallocate to off-balance sheet charity to subsidize underpaying patients on the hope that goodwill becomes a revenue engine. That is not finance. That is faith. It's both, Richard said. And it's strategy. Access expands volume. Volume reduces unit costs. Lower unit costs let us reach new payer tiers. More treated patients generate real-world evidence we can leverage in label expansions. You want a revenue story? That's the story. We've been worshiping the quarter. I'm telling you, there's a better altar. A low murmur threaded the room. Crane leaned back, appraising him like a specimen. Charming, dangerous, naive. Legal cleared her throat. Richard, your public comments at St. Bridget's. I haven't made any, he said. You will, Whitford said, sliding a tablet across the table. On the screen, a grainy photo of Richard in Isabel's room. The caption, Billionaire CEO pays to jump the line with miracle drug. Beneath it, a thread of comments, already acid with accusation. It's begun, Crane said sweetly. If you continue, we'll face congressional letters by Friday, AG inquiries by Monday, a class action by month's end alleging discriminatory access. Our investors are skittish. Your heart may be in the right place. Your head is not. Richard felt the familiar rage rise, and for once, he didn't leash it. Do any of you remember why you came into this field? Before the IPOs and the Cayman boards, a woman is alive today because we lowered a gate we built. That's not scandal. That's redemption. Mercer folded his hands. What you did for that family is human. But this company is not a hospice for your grief or your guilt. We must protect the enterprise. My grief doesn't need your pity, Richard said, voice even. My conscience doesn't need your permission. The meeting dissolved into a tangle of crosstalk scenarios, risks, threats, dressed as advice. By the end, they had agreed to nothing except to meet again in emergency session at 8 a.m. The next day this time with outside counsel and 2 key investors who wanted a say. He slept little. At dawn, he drove to the hospital and found Isabel sitting up, colors back in her cheeks, Daniel animatedly translating the nurse's instructions into Spanish, as if the sounds themselves could lift her out of the bed. Isabel squeezed his hand. You look tired, she murmured. Do not fight with ghosts. They're not ghosts, he said. They're very expensive and very loud. She smiled. Then be louder. Back at headquarters, the emergency session felt less like a meeting and more like a tribunal. Crane had flanked herself with outside counsel. Whitford had arrived with a second phone and a face like a cat in cream. Mercer stacked printouts, projections, analyst notes, a memo from a research VP, lamenting potential talent flight if executive instability continued. Crane opened without ornament. Richard, the board has a responsibility to ensure continuity and stability. Your recent unilateral actions, coupled with personal involvement in a patient case, present material risk. We are prepared to vote to suspend you pending review. Lena slipped into a back chair, jaw tight. Richard caught her eye. She shook her head minutely. No cavalry was coming. He took a breath. Before you vote, hear this. I'm formalizing the Harrington Access Foundation. Today, we'll seed it with my own money to cover year 1 if you lack courage for the reallocation. We'll partner with St. Bridget's and 3 other centers to build a referral pipeline for CardioVax access cases. We'll publish outcomes quarterly, and we'll commit to evaluate pricing structures for therapies that are functionally gated from the people they were designed to help. It's not your decision to make, Crane said. It's my name on the door, he replied, and my signature on every letter we've ever sent claiming we heal. Enough, Whitford said, exasperated. Call the vote. They did. The motion to suspend passed with chilling efficiency. Security waited outside, as if the ending had been printed before the meeting began. Lena followed him to his office. I'm so sorry, she said, voice breaking. Don't be, he said. Finish standing up the foundation paperwork. Quietly, use my personal counsel, and make sure Isabel's course stays uninterrupted. If anyone tries to touch it, call me. He packed what mattered, which turned out to be very little. A framed photo of Sophia and Catherine by the seaside, Sophia's drawing of the castle cake. From last year, a fountain pen that had signed too many compromises. On his desk lay the party place cards Sophia had made for Daniel, a crown, a lightning bolt, balloons, like bright planets. He slipped it into his breast pocket, close to the only thing that felt like a compass. In the lobby, the security chief, an ex-cop with kind eyes, looked pained. This is a formality, sir. Everything is until it isn't, Richard said. Outside, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a Maple Row area code. Mr. Harrington, it's Daniel, Grandma's phone. Grandma says you and Sophia should come to dinner Sunday. She made cookies. I also have something important to show you for your work. It's from my abuelo. Please come. A second text arrived before he could respond. P.S. Grandma says when people are loud and wrong, you don't have to be louder, you have to be clearer. She says you know what that means. Richard stared at the words until they blurred. He looked up at the glass tower that bore his name and felt for the first time that the building was a suit he had outgrown. He typed back with thumbs that didn't quite steady. We'll be there. Tell your grandma thank you. Tell her the medicine is working. 3 blocks away, the markets opened. A notification slid across his screen. Harrington Biopharma dips 4.2% on CEO suspension rumors. The world did what it always did, watched, bet, fed. He slid behind the wheel and drove not back up the hill to the mansion not yet, but to St. Brigid's, where he would stand at Isabel's doorway. And for a little while, exist in a room where numbers couldn't boss love around. He didn't know what Daniel would bring on Sunday, or why the boy thought it mattered for his work. He only knew that the last time Daniel had knocked on a door, a party had become a miracle. The elevator doors opened on the cardiac floor. He stepped out into the bright, antiseptic hallway, into the beep and murmur of machines doing their quiet, holy jobs, and thought, if there is a way through this, it will begin with something small and true. A drawing, a note, a file in an old box. He walked toward Isabel's room, toward the boy who had taught his daughter to laugh again, toward a table that would be set with cookies on Sunday, and maybe, just maybe, the first page of a plan no boardroom could smother. Sunday evening arrived with the smell of cumin and warm tortillas drifting down the stairwell of Maple Row apartments. Richard climbed the steps slowly, Sophia rolling beside him in her chair, her anticipation so obvious she hardly noticed the effort it took to maneuver. Daniel had taped a piece of lined notebook paper to the door, scrawled in careful block letters, "Welcome, friends." Isabel greeted them with a hug that surprised Richard by its strength. Though her frame was fragile, her eyes were bright with the steadiness of a woman who had weathered storms and still believed in mornings. "Come sit," she said, ushering them inside. "We have much to share." The small living room glowed with lamplight. Plates of cookies lined the table, their scent mixing with tamales and Spanish rice that had been made with obvious love. Sophia's wheelchair fit snugly at the edge of the table. Daniel beamed as he placed a folder in front of Richard. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, sliding it forward like a treasure chest. "It's from my abuelo, my grandfather. He was a doctor. He wrote down everything he was working on before he died." Richard opened the folder carefully. Inside were yellowed papers, handwritten notes in Spanish, and faded photographs. One stood out, a man in a white coat, eyes kind and serious, standing beside laboratory equipment. Daniel's resemblance to him was uncanny. "My grandfather's name was Dr. Eduardo Morales," Daniel explained. "He wanted to make medicines cheaper so poor families could have them too. Grandma says he never finished, but he always believed someone else would." Richard's breath caught. He skimmed the notes, his scientist's brain flickering alive in ways that hadn't happened in years. There were formulas, data tables, even preliminary protocols for cardiac treatment, primitive compared to modern trials, but strikingly innovative. And one section, pediatric dosing, lined up exactly with challenges his own teams had been circling for months. "Daniel," he whispered this could change everything. Sophia leaned over. "Daddy, maybe your company can finish what his grandfather started." Isabel folded her hands, voice calm but firm. "Eduardo always said medicine is for healing, not for hoarding. If this work can help, then let it help." Richard looked at the boy who had brought laughter back into his daughter's life, at the grandmother who had risked everything to raise him, at the fragile pages of a dream left unfinished. And he knew he could not walk away. The next morning, he strode into the boardroom carrying the folder. Every polished surface in that room had been designed to intimidate, but for once, he felt no fear. He placed the papers on the table. "This is the work of Dr. Eduardo Morales," he began. 30 years ago, he laid the groundwork for a treatment protocol that could reduce pediatric cardiac drug costs by more than half. His family shared it with me last night. Our own scientists have reviewed the methods. It is sound. It is revolutionary. Crane arched an eyebrow. "And you propose what? To build our strategy around relics from a dead man in a foreign journal?" Richard's voice sharpened. "To build our future around the truth that medicine must serve people first. We will develop this protocol. We will launch the Harrington Access Foundation to ensure patients like Isabel Morales are never again priced out of survival. And we will prove that profit and principle can coexist." The board erupted, angry murmurs, accusations of sentimentality, threats of revolt. But before Crane could gavel the discussion down, the door opened. Dr. Sarah Chen, the respected pediatric cardiologist from Children's Hospital, entered with a portfolio. I was invited by Sophia and Daniel, she said, placing clinical reports on the table. I have reviewed, Dr. Morales' work. It could reduce pediatric cardiac medication costs by 70% without sacrificing efficacy. My hospital is prepared to partner immediately if Harrington Biopharma proceeds. Silence crashed into the room. Even Mercer, the CFO, looked startled. Dr. Chen continued, other children's hospitals are interested as well. This is not charity. This is scale. If you choose the path of greed, competitors will take it. If you choose the path of courage, you will lead it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Richard laid his hand gently on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel, who stood on a chair to be seen clutching the photo of his grandfather. This child and his family reminded me why I became a healer, Richard said, and why we all did once. Today I'm asking you to remember too. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Harrington Biopharma would proceed. Months later, the boardroom walls were covered not with abstract art, but with children's drawings sent by families whose lives had been saved. Stock prices soared, not despite the Access Foundation, but because of it. Goodwill proved a currency as real as cash. On a spring afternoon, Sophia and Daniel raced down the garden paths together, her wheelchair outfitted with modifications Richard had approved himself, Daniel running beside her with a grin wide enough to split the sky. Isabel watched from the porch, humming softly. Richard stood beside her, humbled, almost reverent. You gave them back their childhood, she said. He shook his head. No, they gave me back my humanity. Sophia called out from the garden, waving. Daddy, Daniel says we can fly. And for once, Richard believed her. Because sometimes salvation doesn't arrive in shareholder reports or gilded parties. Sometimes it comes in the knock of a poor boy on a heavy door and the courage to open it.